So, if you couldn't tell, I've been on a bit of a Deadlock kick, and there's one big thing that I've been wanting to talk about with this game, and that's the fact that Deadlock has somehow managed to garner such a large fan base, despite not even officially being out yet. I mean, you still need to have somebody on your friends list invite you into the playtest in order to get access to the game, and there has been zero official marketing material at all. Like, literally, the only reason why Deadlock is even playable by the public in the state that it is today is because back in 2024, it was leaked by a playtester in a closed playtest in an even more unfinished state than it currently is. Also, ironically enough, from what I heard, the guy that originally leaked it specifically did so because he didn't like the game, and he was just trying to show off how bad it was to his friends. So even the initial reveal wasn't exactly under ideal circumstances, but people got so interested in just those little glimpses of Deadlock that Valve functionally made the playtest into an open alpha, and Deadlock has only gained in popularity since then, especially with the more recent updates and visual overhauls that the game has gotten. And the reason why I want to talk about this specific aspect of Deadlock is because, well, as I have been discussing as of late, there have been a lot of live service failures in the last few years. Games like Highguard and Concord and Suicide Squad and Lawbreakers, you know the deal. All of these games, though, they usually have the advantage of being announced at major gaming events, showing off curated trailers that are specifically designed to get people excited to play their games. Yet, so many of these games fall flat on their face, and people can immediately tell that they're going to be a flop long before the game even comes out. Whereas Deadlock has managed to succeed almost entirely on word of mouth and leaks and just watching streamers play it. Not to mention that a lot of people's first impression of Deadlock tends to go something like this.
It has the sauce, is my review of Deadlock. Deadlock has the sauce.
This game, the sauce, man, it's delectable.
I genuinely could not tell you what it is, but they've got to be putting like crack in this game.
The amount of juice on display loading up Deadlock compared to High Guard was so shocking.
You get the idea. So that is the question that I want to try and answer today. What is that secret sauce or juice that seems to make Deadlock so much more appealing, even just on first impression compared to its contemporaries? Now, juice or sauce, or whatever you want to call it, is actually a real game design term. It basically refers, usually, to a bunch of those little extra sound effects and minor animation tweaks that usually aren't necessary to make a game function, but can help heighten the action. You know, like a ball can bounce off of a wall, but adding the actual sound effect to help heighten that bounce, or hit stop to really accentuate the impact, those are juicy elements of a game that help make it feel better. There's a great talk, there's several of them actually, that people have done on the subject. Like, there's one that I distinctly remember where they start out with this very basic breakout style game, but then they slowly keep adding more and more sound effects and animation details to it until it feels like this crazy over-the-top game, even though the core gameplay itself hasn't actually changed at all. And I mean, Deadlock definitely has some of this kind of juice, at least in the basic sense. Like, for example, a lot of people tend to compliment the movement system and say that it feels particularly juicy thanks to all of the different options that you have. Being able to dash and wall jump and slide and chain all of these systems together with other advanced techniques like corner boosting or whatever can make for a really satisfying movement system. But I think that this might be kind of missing the forest for the trees a bit. I don't think that when people are talking about, you know, Deadlock immediately giving that first impression of being super saucy and super juicy, you know, they obviously haven't played the game yet. They haven't learned about these complex, like, systems that are good, but, like, we're talking about why people see Deadlock for the first time and immediately find it to be so much more appealing just on that first impression compared to so many other games. So I think that when people are talking about Deadlock being so juicy, that they're probably more referring to things like the world building and other elements that you can get, like in its artwork, from your first glance. So let's try to zoom out a little bit and look at Deadlock in more broad strokes. So, first of all, I think we gotta talk about the setting, seeing as it's probably the first thing you're going to notice when you watch some gameplay, as it's indicative of the game's overall aesthetics. And I personally love Deadlock's setting. It's this really interesting mix of a very fantastical, magic-filled world, but grounded in classic 1940s New York City Americana. You would think that it would create this sort of disorienting clash of settings, not unlike a certain other recent live service game, but you can tell that they put a lot of effort into the game's world building to make this setting feel cohesive. Just walking around the game's map, it actually feels like you're really walking around this magical version of old New York. You can find countless details in things like the advertisements for various magical services that have just become normalized in this world where magic was discovered and commodified nearly half a century ago. But arguably more importantly, it's also a very unique setting. Now, I'm not going to try and argue that Deadlock is the first game to ever combine magic with middle century America, but at the very least, especially in the 2020s, ever since like Cyberpunk came out, it really feels like this decade of gaming has been dominated by a lot of very sci-fi focused live service titles. I mean, hell, we just got Marathon that just came out a little bit ago, then there's Arc Raiders, Helldivers, Mecha Break, Splitgate, Apex Legends, the list goes on. And I'm not even saying that like the sci-fi genre is bad or anything. I like a lot of these games, but I'm just pointing out that there have been a lot of various takes on the sci-fi genre as of late. So trying to stand out with yet another sci-fi game is going to be a lot harder when there's so many other games to compare yourself to. I mean, this is basically one of the big problems that happened with Concord. It was a hero shooter that tried to release in a market that already had lots of sci-fi games and also already had lots of much more popular hero shooters either playable already or coming out soon. And it was even parodying, or at least it felt like it was parodying, Guardians of the Galaxy, yet another sci-fi franchise that it just couldn't escape the comparisons to. Like, the game didn't feel like it had an original bone in its body. So even if Concord, like, could have possibly redeemed itself somehow through, like, rock-solid gameplay or something, like, most people's eyes had already glazed over from the painfully generic presentation of this sci-fi world that we had already seen a million times already. Then beyond the sci-fi genre, you of course have, you know, the modern military shooter genre, which has been holding strong for multiple decades at this point, with your classic entries like your regular releases of your Call of Duties and Battlefields and a million other games like that, of course. And like, that's kind of the problem that games like High Guard ran into with its setting, because like those devs explicitly said in interviews that they wanted to avoid the sci-fi genre, both for the reasons I just listed, but also because they themselves had already worked on games like Apex Legends and Titanfall, and so they wanted to do something new to try and set themselves apart. And like, I think that trying to go for a more fantasy focused game was the smart move in terms of trying to stand out from their competition. But of course, like many of you already know, the problem with High Guard was that they heavily downplayed the actual fantasy elements in favor of this like low-tech World War I / vaguely sci-fi aesthetic, and also giving everyone these generic modern style guns and rifles. And as a result, not only did that game's world building feel incredibly disjointed, but it also just kind of felt like it was just basically Apex Legends with a really shallow fantasy paint job. It just refused to lean into the actual elements that made it unique and just ended up coming off like yet another generic shooter. And by comparison, Deadlock's world actually feels fantastical. Like, even though it explicitly takes place in 1940s New York City, you can see the magical elements everywhere, from the random ghost pigeons to the architecture and the strange weather to the advertisements and graffiti and the 50-foot tall glowing patrons on each side of the map, and other subtle design cues like that. But of course, the other most important element that you're likely going to notice on a first impression are the characters. After all, when you're first introduced to Deadlock, chances are it's through watching someone's gameplay or seeing a cool highlight reel of some massive over-the-top team fight where all of these distinct characters get to show off their abilities and animations and personalities to each other, you know. Now, again, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds on this. Like, I could very easily go through each individual character's design and try to explain in detail why I think that these character designs are so good, while the individual ones from games like Highguard and Concord are bad, but that has been done numerous times by many people more artistic than myself. Instead, I want to try and zoom out and look at why this roster as a whole is good, and I think that a big part of it comes down to variety and character motivation. Overall, Deadlock has a huge variety of characters. They make use of the more magical aspects of the setting to basically include whatever weirdos they want to have. You know, Ivy is a gargoyle that just randomly came to life one day. Viscus is a ball of goo from the ocean. Billy had his head turned into a goat for some reason. Abrams and Apollo are Ixians, which is a race of people from a country in a parallel dimension that happen to look kind of like devils. Like, even the human characters have tons of cool, unique designs. You know, Lady Geist is a super centenarian movie star with an otherworldly being bound to her arm that keeps her looking young. Venator is a badass priest covered in guns. And I mean, I shouldn't have to even explain what makes the Lash so perfect. Chances are that even if you don't like most of the people on this roster, there's probably someone here that you can fall in love with. Like, I remember when Concord came out that there were certain kinds of people that were trying to argue that it was failing because the cast was just too diverse and various bogus claims like that, but the issue was never that there were aliens and old people on the cast or anything dumb like that. And if anything, I feel like Highguard kind of shows the opposite end of that spectrum, with all of their main characters usually just being some variation of just a person with a gun. Like, the most interesting character in that game was literally the last one they added before it got shut down, and that's probably just because they were wearing an actual suit of armor that gave them any amount of a unique silhouette compared to all of the other characters. No, the issue with these other games, I think, goes a lot deeper than just these surface level criticisms about diversity, or that one game or the other was trying to be too realistic and too grounded in its designs. No, it's that these characters in Highguard and Concord and a number of other live service failures, they're just not cohesive. They don't really convey anything resembling what their roles are in game, and they don't even have like real backstories to inform their characters. They just feel like a random hodgepodge of assets thrown together into something playable as an afterthought. See, personally, I think that there's more to good character design than just the visual element of them. Obviously, the end goal is to make an appealing looking character, and there's a number of functional elements of a visual design that are very important to consider, but the process of how you get there arguably matters just as much as things like a character's backstory and their motivation can help inform how the character would want to look, and in turn lead to a much more cohesive design. Not to mention that it helps informs other aspects like their behavior and how they would be animated and how they would interact with other characters on the roster, which helps make them into much more cohesive, three-dimensional people. And I really do feel like that this is what sets games like Overwatch and Deadlock, of course, apart from games like Concord and Highguard. Like, this was something I specifically remember complaining about when I originally reviewed Highguard. The characters just felt incredibly bland, and I felt like it was because, at least in part, they seemingly put zero thought into their individual character motivations. As far as I was able to tell at the time, they were all just generic generic mercenaries for hire. Sure, they all had unique magic powers or whatever, but like they had zero meaningful relations with or against each other because they were just fighting whoever they were paid to fight, and we didn't even get to know who was paying them in the first place. And it was basically the same deal with Concord too. Like, I guess there seemed to be a little bit more thought put into some of the character relationships, at least based on some of those initial trailers. But again, most of the characters, from what I could tell, were mostly just bounty hunters and mercenaries that only cared about treasure hunting and trying to make a quick buck. And like, I'm not saying that you can't have a greedy character who only cares about money. That can work perfectly fine as a character motivation, but you can't just give your entire cast the same generic motivation like that, especially when it can end up contrasting with what their character appears to be. Like, I still remember, like, the main character of Highguard, you know, John Highguard himself, he's clearly meant to be this, like, holy paladin style character, a very upstanding gentleman. You know, you could tell he seems like, you know, the main good guy of the cast, and a lot of the animations center on that. But at the same time, he's also this mercenary for hire who will just fight and kill whoever you point him at. And like, that just doesn't mesh with who he appears to be as a person. And as a result, these character designers have almost nothing to work with for how these people should look or behave. If they all have the same generic motivation, then they have no reason to stand out from one another. And I think that that's what really makes these designs suffer. But with Deadlock, the core premise of the game is perfect for breeding interesting character motivations. Basically, the main story of Deadlock is that there is some kind of major ritual happening in the heart of New York City, where these two powerful otherworldly patrons are vying for control over one another. And as such, they have each recruited a team of people to fight on their behalf and take down the opposing patron. So that kind of explains why the game is happening. But instead of just offering them something basic like wealth and glory or whatever, the patrons are specifically offering each character a seemingly unlimited wish of their choosing. Now, like, I guess it's a little unclear as to like what the limits are on what these wishes can be, or even if there are any, but regardless, the first thing now that everyone should be asking whenever a new character is added to Deadlock is, what is their wish? What is it that they are willing to put their life on the line for and fight in this dangerous ritual in order to attain? And the answer to that question has, I think, informed a lot about how each of these characters look and behave, and given them a much more deep and interesting design language than most of these other live service games. I mean, let's just run through a few of examples. Like, Dynamo here has experienced an accident that has trapped him in his robotic body, and he just wants to return to his normal human form for the sake of his family. Victor is a reanimated corpse with no memories of who he is or how he came to be, and he wants to find out the truth about his origins. Celeste is a circus performer that's not so secretly a unicorn, but is willing to potentially reveal herself to the world if it means being able to protect her newfound family from harm. Seven is a power-mad occultist that has somehow survived his own execution, where they were trying specifically to destroy him, not only in his body, but even his soul, and now he wants to achieve some level of apotheosis. And Rem is a cute little guy that was accidentally brought into the real world from some kind of dreamscape land, and it just wants to find a way to get home. And even when a character doesn't want to get a wish from the patrons, that still tends to say a lot about them as well. You know, the Lash seemingly just wants to participate in the ritual just because it'll let him show off how cool and strong he is and rub it in the face of his rivals. Though it is also possible that he might have some things to wish for that he's just not telling anyone. Drifter is an ancient vampire that has been murdering people for hundreds of years, and he's purely in the ritual for the love of the game and just sees it as an excuse to keep killing and eating people. And Warden comes from a long line of people that have hunted the supernatural and specifically wants to try and kill both of the patrons to stop them from meddling in our world. Sure, I'm not saying that just by looking at these characters that you can somehow instantly tell what all of their motivations are, but I think that because they have these specific defined motivations, that it has almost certainly helped the creators of this game design these characters to reinforce the elements of their backstory, in turn inform how they behave and act during gameplay. Victor is constantly brooding and in pain due to his stitched together corpse of a body, so naturally his playstyle revolves around constantly taking damage and trying to out-heal that damage on himself so that his enemies die before he does. Rem is a naive child that is just looking for help, so he literally clings to other characters to support them while he takes a nap. Seven is cocky and powerful, so of course his ultimate has him rising up into the sky while damaging everything around him in a 3-block radius. And Jacob Lash is an asshole. These personalities shine through so well in their animations and gameplay and voice lines and just everything that people have even started role-playing as the respective characters they're playing as during games. And I mean, if that's not a sign of good character design, then I don't know what is. Finally, the last thing that I think really helps Deadlock stand out is what happens when you actually first boot up the game. Now, I don't know if it's just because there's like a popular template that everyone likes to use, or if it's just a matter of convergent design or something, but I swear that so many of these live service games just have a very generic menu system that makes them all feel very samey. Like, usually you got somebody from the game posing dramatically with a bunch of basic buttons strewn about for matching up with friends and entering the game, and of course buying cosmetics or whatever. And I mean, those menus are functional, sure, they get the job done, but I mean, I vastly prefer games like Helldivers and of course Deadlock that just put you in the shoes of your character right away and make the menu itself a part of the gameplay. Literally, from the first moment that you boot up the game, you're already existing in this strange occult version of New York. You're looking over this familiar yet foreign magical cityscape with a ton of fun decorations strewn about the hideout that help play into this game's really fun and unique world building that I was talking about earlier, without even having to read any of the characters' backstories or hear a single line of dialogue. You are already becoming familiar and free to explore this game's universe and how it works. And arguably, the best part of this is that it also serves as a really quick and easy way to start trying out the different characters. Like, sure, there are options to play bot games or go through a tutorial or whatever, and there's even a sandbox that lets you really try out some crazy stuff. Instead of having to do any of that, you can also just literally walk over to the left side of the hideout and you're presented with an open training area where you can use and try out all of your character's abilities at will. And I think that the ease of being able to swap to whatever hero you want and try them out within seconds of booting up the game without having to find any of these practice tools in a menu or anything, it really does help people get into the groove of how this game plays and feels as quickly as possible. But yeah, I really do feel that these are the main elements that have helped Deadlock garner such a big fan base so quickly despite its unfinished state. Obviously, the game is great on its own, and as I've talked about before, I think it does a lot of good things to help introduce people to the MOBA genre in a much more understandable way than a lot of prior games. But you also just gotta get people hooked in the game in the first place in order to even have them downloaded and try it out. So to serve that end, the setting and world building both feel unique compared compared to a lot of its competition, but also has a lot of detail that helps it feel cohesive and alive. And the characters that you get to play as are designed with all of these fun, unique backstories that help inform and reinforce their designs and gameplay styles. And of course, the game does its best to try and get you invested in its world and its characters as quickly as possible. I mean, hell, I remember back when I first got into the game back in the day, me and my friends literally spent like an hour just going through and reading all of the characters' backstories and slowly piecing together what info we could get about the setting and world building. And like, it was a lot of fun seeing how each character on the cast would play into this world or have prior relationships with other characters. Stuff like figuring out who the main powerful factions were, like Fairfax Industries and the Baxter Society and whatnot, and what the history of this world was like. It's just super fun to piece that all together, and it's only getting more interesting the more characters that they add and the more detail that is built into this world. But as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. I'm curious to hear what some of your guys' first impressions of Deadlock were. Like, did you find out about it from just watching some streamer you like playing a match, or maybe you saw some leaks of it online on Reddit or something, or maybe even found out about it through a video essay like this, you know? And ever since that recent Old Gods update, where they added a ton of cool effects and of course the actual patron models to the game, I actually really feel like Deadlock has only gotten that much more interesting and fun to watch, which in turn has only managed to hook that many more people into the game, which has likely resulted in its massive jump in popularity over the recent months. But for now, if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. If you want to help the channel out more directly, there's a link to my Ko-Fi in the description down below. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.